a show dedicated to spotlighting the most urgent left organizing and activism happening around the country and beyond for racial and economic justice and so much more. Stay tuned for future episodes of Frontline Dispatches every Wednesday at 7 Eastern, at 6 Central, 4 Pacific. My name is Montague Simmons. I'll be today's host. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please leave comments and chats, and we'll be monitoring as the show goes on. If you haven't done so yet, please give Org Upgrade a like and subscribe to this channel on YouTube. And finally, to stay up to speed with all the amazing content coming out of Organizing Upgrade, sign up at our website to hear about upcoming events, videos, articles about left strategy, specifically for organizers. All right, let's get into it. So tonight, our guest, Richard Wallace, is an artist, organizer, and founder of Equity and Transformation in Chicago. His work focuses on organizing Black informal workers to confront anti-Black racism in the U.S. and abroad. As a formerly incarcerated Chicago native, Rich returned to his community to empower marginalized workers. Rich is a nationally recognized artist who goes by the name Epic of Chicago's rap trio BBU. He's also founder of the Roosevelt University student chapter of the Stop Mass Incarceration Network and the founder of Future of Benin program in West Africa. He's one of the inaugural AFRI, that's Atlantic Fellows for Racial Justice Fellows, and a Vocal alum, and was recently selected as a Soros Justice Fellow. And he joins me at the policy table leadership team within the Movement for Black Lives. Rich, welcome to Frontline Dispatch.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on the call, Montague. You already know you're one of the real ones, and I'm grateful to be on the call with you today.
Yeah, man, we're happy to have you here. So let's jump into it. This last year has been hard on all levels, like from COVID to the White House. People have actually been navigating unprecedented levels of both fear and uncertainty. Communities have been, in some cases, straight up abandoned. Many folks took to the street, but going into 2021, like I think a lot of us have been carrying like just a lot of deep trauma. Equity and Transformation has put, even before this moment, a focus on one of those communities who I know during COVID had it much harder than we think about when we're talking about the working class. Will you talk to the folks that are watching about the informal economy, who occupies it, and how EAT has been working to organize it?
Yeah, so again, my name is Richard Wallace. I'm the founder of Equity and Transformation, EAT, which is a nonprofit organization in Chicago focused on building social and economic equity for Black Chicagoans engaged in the informal economy. We call the informal economy, text is like a diversified set of economic activities that people engage in to acquire some form of subsistence, right? And it's not protected by the state. For me, it reminds me of the faces that come to mind are Eric Garner, Alton Sterling, and the countless, trans and cisgender commercial sex workers that are killed in our state every year, right? So for me, the informal economy is essentially how our folks have made lemonade out of lemons. It is where you land when you are told that you cannot get a job here because you have a background. So it's tied to the prison industrial complex. It is where you get hip hop. It is where you get jazz. It is where you get extremely creative versions or creative opportunities or outlets where our people have used, use their creativity to create some form of wage or income for themselves. It is, I think informality kind of brings, the contradictions of capitalism to the head, right? Like, what does it mean to exist in a country that is designed, with what we consider a social contract, and that is that you exchange your labor for a wage, and you use that wage to acquire means of subsistence, right? You use that wage to buy food, water, and shelter, right? But then you have an entire population who is boxed out of that economy, and historically has been so, right? From slavery to now, you see how the system of capitalism essentially has used different modes in order to reduce the income and the value of our labor. And so that's, essentially what informality is. It is hip hop, it is jazz, it is the loose square person, the candy lady or candy person. It is whoever sells you bootleg DVDs back before Netflix was popping. Like it is all of those things. And so we are organizing Black informal workers, trying to bring them together around, to engage deeply in our democracy and change the material conditions in their communities.
Okay, so one, if we're talking about that sector of the economy, then that leaves me concerned, because like when COVID hits, that means one, we're not engaging each other in the same way.
Yeah.
But for those fam that have to be on the streets, like they still got to do this. So how did each shift its organizing and its strategy to hold space?
Yeah, in March. It was in March, March of 2020. I think we all were kind of hearing about COVID-19, but we didn't quite understand what the impact would be when it reached us, right? And us, I mean Black folks, right? And so, I was also like caught off guard. It was my daughter's birthday is like March 16th. So we had plans of like going to, her name is 7, and it was her 7th birthday. So we're planning on going to Disney World. It was like a long time commitment. We had talked about this since she was 1. And so I was just sitting there like, nah, we going, like all the way up until the date. My partner, Samantha, with wife, she was looking at me like, bro, like this ain't gonna happen, And I was just like, no. I'd already bought the tickets, months ahead, Black folks, we got a plan.
That's right.
And so, it didn't dawn on me until like the hotel called me and said like, yeah, you can't come. And that it was that real. So I think we immediately switched and started doing like digital outreach. And I really thought that was going to be the mode that we would do the majority of our work during the COVID pandemic. We began to build out this thing called a Life Kit. It was like it's a pamphlet that basically, gave you the facts around COVID-19. Also, it was like we had some fitness suggestions, some eating suggestions, et cetera, to get the word out. Because a lot of our folks ain't watching the news or, have, access to the internet like we think everybody does. And so it was like mid-March until like late March, I was like, yo, we're going to go out to Madison and Springfield where we do a lot of work. And so Madison and Springfield is on the west side of Chicago. If folks don't know, it's an open air, there's an open air market, a lot of informal activity over there. So we post up and we do a lot of our work there. And we got there, and as soon as we got there, they had like at least 6 young Black folks handcuffed to a curb. And so we pulled the car over and we got out and we talked to the white shirt. Those who don't know, white shirts are like generally the folks that are running the strip or whatever. And we're like, what's going on here? And they're like, well, there's a dispersal order in place and that everybody has to be dispersed by 6 p.m. And I was like, but it's 12 o'clock. So why are they in handcuffs at 12 o'clock? And he gave me this look like, oh, you a smart yard. You know what I'm saying? Like, whatever. And I gave him the pamphlet. I walked up to him with the pamphlet in my hand, like, this is what we're out here doing. And I was like, I told the shorties to meet us here to pick up the life kits, right? So then when we began to set up shop, but I knew at that moment that we could not be, I could not be detached from the on the ground work. The digital world was not going to be enough. I knew that we were also battling the ghost of Tuskegee. A lot of our folks were not necessarily interested in hearing what this was about because of that, because of our lack of trust in the healthcare institutions, and so we wanted to give folks the facts, and we also wanted folks to know that we would be there. We began doing COVID-19 mutual aid right after that. Right, it started with the Life Kit. It expanded to like we're doing gift cards to offset the cost of resources that folks needed. And then we started doing rent support. So it scaled up and we were doing rent support up to like $500. And then like some of the institutions that were like, well, how are you going to define if they got, if they're homeless, like if they have an address, are you going to check for like, I'm like, I'm not doing background checks for my people. I'm going to trust them. I assume that if you stand up in line and wait, you needed it. And so that was basically our principle in doing our mutual aid efforts. And we got out, we at the end of the day, I think we provided mutual aid resources to over 854 households, majority of which were system impacted folks. And in the city of Chicago, which has never even beckoned to ask the question, what does it mean to be homeless during COVID? What does it mean to be a victim of domestic violence during COVID? What does it mean to self-quarantine as a victim of domestic violence during COVID? they were just trying to get our people off the streets. And as things escalated over the summer, a lot of things went down in Chicago, and I think we can kind of get into that later. But right now, like, I think the most important things is that we were able to provide mutual aid to 854 households. We didn't have a clear, plan on how we're gonna do mutual aid, but our folks, we just get in rhythm and we do it. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue to serve, our folks in the informal sector.
Right on, right on. Bro, there's a lot there. I mean, we know that when this moment hit, I think most of us assumed that the government was going to abandon those of our folks that was most needy. And usually with that type of austerity, criminalization goes hand in hand with it. But yeah, so, I mean, before we dig into that piece, because I can only imagine like the impact of that in terms of criminalization and policing in Chicago. Yeah. I'm curious, like, I don't see a lot of orgs specifically targeting this population. And that's a lot of engagement. So I'm curious, like, what you've learned. And I know you guys just dropped a report talking about survival economy.
Yeah.
Can you give us some highlights in terms of like what you were able to learn, glean from it?
Yeah, I think a lot of the work, like landing on the work of like organizing in the informal sector, came to me while I was in Africa, right? So you read off of my bio, the Future Benin Project. My mom was on a vengeance in late 90s, early 2000s to like reclaim her heritage. And she went to Benin, West Africa, and got adopted by a family, and now we be back and forth and everything like that. And one of the things that I recognized when I was there is that, like, I thought we hustle in Chicago, but they hustle way harder. Like, as soon as we got off the plane, it was like, pure water. It was almonds, cashews, like whatever they had, mango, coconut water, whatever, and I was just like, wow, it was overwhelming, right? And it reminded me of the 90s in Chicago. We had to open air markets and people get out and hustle. And so I was just like, I was like, where? I spoke to some folks that worked in policy there, and I'm like, do y'all have clear definitions for like the informal sector? And they're like, yeah, we know exactly how to reach them in times of crisis, et cetera, et cetera. And when it came to Black informality in the United States, I started doing research and I couldn't find nothing. Right? It was almost assumed as if like Black folks were not engaged in the informal economy, right? And the reality is, when you have areas with 81% unemployment, common sense says that informality must be high there, right? Because the demand capitalism, the way I think about it, like capitalism, it demands that you have capital, right? You can't buy groceries with hope, right? So if you're in an area that has, low access to employment, the racial wealth gap is extremely high. Right. The analysis should be that there's informal occupations and informal work taking place here. So we began to kind of like venture out and try to establish an analysis around and a narrative around Black informality. And what I found, what I was able to unearth, is that it's there. It's just riddled and covered in anti-Black racism. People don't want to see the reality of what Black people are doing to survive. It's easier for the city to just, assume that the bottom of the economic ladder is unemployment, right? And to not really go and do a deep dive into what our people are doing to survive. So a lot of our initial work was just around understanding the scale and scope of informality. And I came from the streets, right? And so I was like, I know it exists because I was in it. You know what I mean? Like, so it was like very intentional about, engaging there. And I think one of the most important pieces I want to lift up is around that informal occupations are not fixed, right? They often migrate from informal to formal. And the state is the instrument that formalizes informal occupations, right? And what we have found is that when that shift occurs, right, there's a lack of retention in Black bodies as it shifts from informal to formal. So if you think about bootleg and alcohol, you see a high rate of Black activity in the informal sector.
That's right.
Right. So when it's not structured and not formalized by the state, Black people get access. The state legalizes a particular occupation. It credentializes that occupation. And in the credentializing of the occupation, they box out Black people, right? And so we were very intentional about our engagement in the cannabis equity fight, because we were like, this is a jobs fight. I came from labor, and I'm like, this is a jobs fight. These are jobs that are currently occupied. And there's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's heading for our city, right, that has no Black inclusion, right? And so if we don't shake some inclusion out of this, then, you know, A, B, and C. So we began to engage in that around that analysis.
Okay. Wow. I mean, it's mind-blowing that, like, one, you focus right now on Chicago, but like all the cities around the country, we know this is a reality, and nobody's actually unpacking, like, one, how to reach out folks there, but let alone like how in moments like this they're directly impacted. Like you mentioned, like in Benin, when COVID, something like that hits, they know how to reach them, how to actually communicate them, how to communicate with those folks.
Yeah.
And here we don't. So your report on like the survival economy, can you give us some highlights? Like, what did you learn?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that one is that the informal, I mean, I think that we also led with the assumption that we were going to build out these informal worker associations.
Okay.
We assumed that, like, if you sold DVDs, we was going to have like a loose square sellers association, a scrap metal workers association, a child care workers association, etc.
Oh, wow.
And in reality, what it looked like is that people had multiple jobs.
Yep.
They held multiple occupations. You were braiding hair, selling bootleg DVDs and sandwiches, and making plates for the party or whatever. So it was like people had multiple. That was one of the most glaring things. I think another piece that stood out to me was, I think 40% of the people that we surveyed said that they did not believe that employment was an option. Like they didn't know where they could. What are some other highlights? I think a lot of the stories that were in there were also extremely important highlights. Like there's a story in there, and in it is a young person that's talking about the contradiction of like serving time and being done with serving time, but then being boxed out the economy on the opposite end of it, right? Like, so you have all in one breath, you have a state apparatus that is saying that you're guilty of a crime. We're going to send you to jail for that crime, right? And then on the opposite end, we're also going to organize the private, the private industry to deny you access to jobs, right? When you get out. So you get out with fees and fines, right? Like you get out with court fees and fines. If you get out on house arrest, you got to pay fines, all of those different, those financial burdens, but then you're also rendering them, jobless at the same time by saying that we do background checks at this employment location, or et cetera, et cetera. So those were some of the key findings, and there's a lot more within the report. I'm sure I'm missing. It's a robust report with a number of extremely important data points on it.
Right on. Okay. It looks like we got a question from the chat. Okay. Do you have an estimate of what percentage of Black Chicago is in the informal economy?
Yeah, so I think that there's over 80,000. This is one of the most important points for me, right? There's over 80,000 unemployed Black folks in the city of Chicago. There's no surplus of 80,000 jobs waiting for Black folks in Chicago. This is the part that has to be lifted up, right? Like the assumption that, like, all the different tropes around Black folks and labor, which is this hypocritical and a full-on lie. Our labor built this country, right? Like, there's no such thing. I ain't never met nobody Black that was ever lazy, right? Like and so going back to the question, my assumption is that all of our folks in some way or somehow are engaged in informality, in one way or another, right? Whether we're buying, I had a full-time job and still bought bootleg DVDs, right? So I mean, I think it is an insular, economy that a lot of our folks are engaged in. And it's not like these are always permanent vocations. That was one important piece that was lifted up in the story, though. We had people that had engaged in informality or in the informal economy, their introduction to it was 10 years old, and they've been in it and they're 60 years old now, right? They've never had formal employment, right? And so that was a very important piece that was lifted up. But I assume that out of the 80,000 or so folks that are unemployed, a lot of our folks, unless we're literally starving on the street, we're figuring out ways to create capital where there is none.
That's right. Okay, I want to take a quick second and invite folks that are watching on Facebook or YouTube. Please drop your questions in the chat, comments, observations. And in doing that, like Rich, one place I want to lean into, like when we met in part because of the uprisings in St. Louis and Ferguson, literally also in Chicago. And Chicago has a deep history of organizing for police accountability.
Yeah.
You talk to us about the work that EAT's been doing, because honestly, like you've had some substantial victories over the last year. And I don't know if everybody realizes like the way your strategy has actually been driving this.
Yeah. So I think one thing to lift up is that we do comprehensive organizing, comprehensive campaign development. So our organizing, it is research, base building, aka building local power, policy development, and advocacy. Right, those are the four wheelhouses that we kind of connect in communications. Right, and so we got tapped. Like, look, we're building out this federal Breathe Act. What would it look like in Illinois? And so we're able to bring, the language of the federal Breathe Act to the state of Illinois and try to organize a policy demand that hit the red lines associated with the federal Breathe Act and implement it locally. That work of that kind of passing or handing of the baton to equity and transformation was also about the relationship that we have with the organizations that exist in Chicago. So it's not, I wrote an article that was talking about like, no, there is no victory unless we all win. Right? So I want to say that this, like the victory or the ability for this policy to do what it did, and we'll get into HB 3653, but that came, that came off the shoulders of people like Charlene Carruthers, Jason Perez, Fresco, and all of the folks at BYP, Assata's Daughters, and even further back, Barbara Ransby, my mother, Reverend Doris Green, like all the historic work that our people have been doing to chip away at this, gave agency to our Black Caucus to really begin to take some radical steps. And they were able to implement HB 3653. And what it did, one of the most important things is the Pretrial Fairness Act that was definitely championed by the Coalition to End Money Bail, and Brendan Schiller and his crew, and Sharon Mitchell, and folks that were historically holding that work. What we're able to do with the Breathe Act is really take all of the demands, right, from the organizations that are doing real work and put it into one policy and say, this is what we mean by divest, and this is what we mean by invest. And through that, we're able to end money bond, end prison gerrymandering in Illinois. So shout out to Change Illinois. And then we built out the Illinois Breathe Coalition, that's really going to be anchoring this work moving forward. The bill is on the governor's desk. It ends, some of the most important points is ends cash bond, prison gerrymandering piece. The legislation also ends bans on chokeholds. The components around demilitarization, they won't be able to buy any more tanks. And it was like they needed tanks, and people did it. People were just kind of like, oh, they have tanks. And I was like, well, it was evident because on the West Side, they brought tanks to the West Side during the pandemic. So we know they got them, you know what I'm saying? Like, and we know who they're trying to use it for. So I think, it's beautiful in what, I think the ethos of Black movement, and shout out to Barbara Ransby, the academics that were pushing, the movement folks that were pushing, the social service organizations that were pushing. Shout out to, Marlon Chamberlain and all the formerly incarcerated folks, Benny Lee, all the folks that have been working across the state of Illinois to really make this possible. And there was an opportunity, I think, in the Black Caucus members, they put rubber to the road, and they were like, let's go. And we're able to get the bill passed, and now it's waiting for the governor's signature.
Okay, man. One thing that I'm constantly in awe of in both Chicago and Illinois broadly is that the policy that tends to take life and take root there tends to be more radical. Because this is literally like you mentioned divest, invest. This is one that's deconstructing the system. And I know EAT specifically has always been about repair instead of reform. Yeah. Can you talk more about like that strategy and how that undergirds the work that you've been driving?
Yeah, I think that, so let me think. Like a lot of our work right now is around narrative change. right? So it's around like the growth of. I mean, so shout out to Chicago has great organizing. So I mean, that's one thing to just say. Like, I mean, it's contentious. There's some challenges there that exist because of the nonprofit industrial complex, and then also capitalism definitely plays a role in like competition and stuff like that. And I tried to dismantle that by being like, yo, everybody wins, right? Like, that's the way I fight. The capitalist kind of like narrative and with equity and transformation is like, yo, like we all win. Everybody gets included. Every article I'm writing, I'm talking about everybody that has been part of this work, right?
Exactly.
And so that I think that's one of the principles that we also lean on. The history of organizing in Illinois has been strong. The policy development has been strong, but it has been fought for tooth and nail. You're talking about direct actions. You're talking about sit-ins. You're talking about civil disobedience. You're talking about I remember Paige Manning took over the E-way for a minute. You know what I'm saying? Like it was like like real real E. And that was all learned. I think a lot of those folks we got our training in Ferguson. I look back on some of the early Ferguson videos, and I'm in meetings with people now that are in policy places now, and we're also have been able to move people into office. Right? We have we have. I'm not sure how many outwardly facing socialist alder people in the state of Illinois. Wow. We have elected officials that are talking about reparations for the war on drugs. We have, so I think that the organizing has grown. We still need more elected officials. Shout out to Senator Peters as well, who was definitely a champion on the Illinois Breathe Act. And so, we have real elected officials. We have Black-led institutions like Equity and Transformation, like SOUL, like Black Roots Alliance, like all of our partners that are actually, I think the growth of our movement has been, Laquan McDonald, Mike Brown, Rekia Boyd, a lot of those direct actions led to us being more curious about our strength in the policy realm. And also the need for us to be engaged in the electoral work, right? And so we can move our people into office so they can pass our demands, right? So I see this kind of growth from Ferguson to now where we've had to kind of adapt and take on more than just the direct actions, but the entire gambit of what it means to change this society. And so I really think it's like a maturing of our work that is creating, new possibilities in the realm of policy.
Wow. So how can folks continue to plug in locally? Like, how do they continue to make visible, and specifically to center Black folks that are, one, being directly impacted in the informal economy? And how do they plug in?
Yeah, so we are a membership-based organization. We have monthly membership meetings. You can, and we have a dynamic lead organizer, Alonzo Waheed. And that's one thing I want to tap. Like, our organization is led by formerly incarcerated people. And that was very intentional, right? I wanted to ensure that like policymakers, policy wonks, et cetera, were in rooms with formerly incarcerated people from the top to the bottom. You know what I'm saying? From the bottom to the top. Right. And so it was important to like, ensure that we, because another unique piece is that I'm going to say this, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so the majority of our resources go directly to salaries and benefits. So if your nonprofit organization, believes in, Black liberation, but still uses background checks, then you're problematic. Right.
Right.
If you believe in like the the agency of formerly incarcerated people, you will bring them into your ranks. And so what was important for me at Equity and Transformation was to not just serve these populations, right, but also ensure that we provide salaries and incomes for system impacted folks as well. So that was like key to EAT's development, and people can plug in to EAT. Follow us on Twitter at Eat Chicago, Eat Chicago on Instagram, and we got a new website, www.eatchicago.org, and you can follow us and get in tune with us there. So that's how folks plug in, and we have chapters in both Chicago and in Joliet, Illinois.
Sweet. Rich, thank you for making time to plug in tonight. Like, honestly, I think our folks have learned like a lot in 30 minutes. Yeah. To our audience, if you enjoyed this video, like stay up to speed with all the amazing content coming out of Organizing Upgrade. Sign up at the website to hear more about upcoming events, videos, etc. Thank you to everybody who was able to join us tonight, and thank you explicitly to Rich. Thank you to the production team at Organizing Upgrade, and tap back in next week. Same day, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night.